On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we get into free agent options for the wide receiver position, with free agency starting in just 1 week.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. What's going on, Eagles fans? I'm Louis DiBiase, your host of Locked On Eagles, and today's Monday edition of the show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before, because BetOnline is where the game starts and it's where it ends for Falcons wide receiver Calvin Ridley, who was suspended today for all of the 2022 season because he was gambling outside of the Atlanta Falcons facility when he was not with the team in the month of November. So that's one less wide receiver option for the Eagles to either sign, draft, or in Ridley's case, trade for. And that's what we're going to get into coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles. We're going to get into the wide receiver position. Calvin Ridley was linked with the Eagles, and it makes sense. He was teammates with Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts at Alabama. The Eagles need a wide receiver too to pair with Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins in 2022. NFL free agency starts next Wednesday officially, but the tampering window opens on the 15th. Free agency officially kicks off on the 16th. So with a week away separating us from free agency, over the coming days on Locked On Eagles, we're going to start up our free agent option series. Today starts with receiver, tomorrow running back and tight end, so on and so forth. So we will take 1 week off of Mock Draft Monday on the show. But follow me on Twitter at DiBiase LOE. I got an Eagles mock draft for you. I'm going to post later today, not in video form, but I'm going to do a mock draft and screenshot it and then get your guys' thoughts. So make sure you're hitting us up because we're always talking Eagles after the show on Twitter at LockedOnBirds, at DiBiase LOE, and my co-host Gino Camilleri. He's on Twitter at GC24_football. So today, segment 1, we're going to talk about tier 1 big name wide receivers the Eagles could potentially be interested in. Segment 2, we'll talk about some tier 2 receivers. In segment 3, maybe some bargain bin players, because it is interesting the Eagles approach what it's going to be at receiver this offseason. I'm really fascinated because it feels like for the first time in a long time, the Eagles finally got some things right at wide receiver, especially when it comes to young players. This team could not bring in a young, productive receiver to save their lives. Even the good ones, that they picked in the first round or two, they didn't become stars. Jordan Matthews going all the way back to 2014 was good for a few years, but he was good, not great. Nelson Agholor, same thing, had a flash in the pan when it mattered most, of course, in 2017. But overall, I didn't even mention Josh Huff in the third round. And of course, JJ Arcega-Whiteside and Jalen Reagor. And then finally, it felt like in 2020 at the end of the draft, in this past draft, in the first round, they struck. And they have at least 2 of their 3 long-term pieces with Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins. But they still do need one more piece, one established productive receiver to go with Smith and Watkins. And to be honest, it was the piece that they were hoping Jalen Reagor was going to become in 2021. And it makes sense. He was a first-round pick. Heading into year 2, you were hoping he was going to be that guy, and Reagor, Smith, and Watkins were your established trio. Obviously, that did not pan out. Reagor was as bad as 2015, 2016 Nelson Agholor, and so the Eagles do have a need here at wide receiver. But at the same time, they don't desperately need one like they did last year, because Devontae Smith is going to be their wide receiver 1 of the future, and quite frankly, already is. And Quez Watkins is now your new burner you've been looking to replace since you lost to Deshaun Jackson the first time around in 2014. He's a player that had over 600 yards last year and should have had a lot more as a 6th-round pick just a year before that only had 100 receiving yards. If they didn't move to be such a run-heavy team in the second half of the season, Quez might have sniffed 700, definitely would have sniffed 700 yards. He was on pace for a while there to surpass 800, get in the 900 to 1,000 range. So they do have some established young pieces, but one more would really put this team over the top. And so today we're going to discuss the options when it comes to free agency. There are a lot of options in the draft as well. We know the Eagles have 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, and they have been very willing to invest in receiver early and often, even with some of these sunk costs. But at the same time, again, the approach, since they already have 2 young receivers, might be this offseason to get, again, an established, proven veteran that can play both inside and out, along with the interchangeability of Smith and Watkins. And I think that's the popular approach. I think that's what most fans and media would suggest. It's super interesting. There are a lot of names on, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 that could entice the Eagles this year, as they do have more salary cap space and they do have more flexibility to take chances with all the draft picks and capital they have this offseason, especially compared to recent years. So let's kick things off with tier 1. And we mentioned this a little bit on Friday because there was news that Amari Cooper was potentially going to be, and he's going to be released by the Dallas Cowboys. And we kind of were mulling the idea of, would the Eagles be interested in bringing in a big, I always call it a big fish free agent, your big game hunting with somebody like Cooper? Because again, you don't really need a wide receiver 1. Would they still be willing to pay big money if Cooper was willing to come to Philadelphia, or Allen Robinson, as you see on the right of our screen for our video viewers? You also have Christian Kirk from the Arizona Cardinals coming off a season where he surpassed 900 yards with Arizona. And again, Kirk normally was seen as a tier 2 player, but the thing you got to think about, if you're the Eagles and you want somebody like Allen Robinson, Amari Cooper, more so Christian Kirk, today it was announced Chris Godwin's going to be franchise tagged. Mike Williams is expected to, if the Chargers don't get a long-term deal with him done now, even though they want to, they're going to franchise tag Mike Williams as well. There was the report on Friday after the Cooper news that Dallas wants to, and they intend to re-sign Michael Gallup. So you take away some of the top names on the market, right? Godwin, Mike Williams, Michael Gallup. I imagine Davante Adams is going to go back to Green Bay if Aaron Rodgers does choose to go back to the Packers. Even if he didn't, Davante Adams is not coming to Philadelphia. So that's like 4 or 5 big names at the top of this free agent class of pass catchers that are not going to be available. So if the Eagles want somebody like Christian Kirk, that's still going to be a, tier 1, if you will, type of signing that's going to command north of probably 11, 12, 13 million dollars. And so the question you have to ask yourself, is it worth it this offseason to take that guy, considering you have Smith and Watkins? I personally would want one. I do think you can afford to pay one while Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins are on rookie contracts. You have the flexibility with all these draft picks and more money this year to take a gamble. I don't even know if it's a gamble, but to, splurge a little bit, because you could address other needs with the more money you have. With 4 picks, 5 picks in the first 3 rounds, you can say, yeah, maybe it is a luxury to have Allen Robinson with Watkins and Smith, or Christian Kirk, or heck, you go hunt for Amari Cooper. It might seem like a luxury, but this year you might be able to afford it. And at the same time, while it might be seen as a luxury, and it is, but at the same time, having 3 wide receivers, it's necessary now. You don't have to have 3 stars. You don't have to have Amari Cooper with this group. I think a guy like DJ Chark would do just fine, or a first round pick like, Chris Olave, if you will, or Treylon Burks. But you saw the advantage the Cincinnati Bengals had, the Buffalo Bills have, the Kansas City Chiefs have, the Super Bowl champion Los Angeles Rams had with Odell Beckham, Cooper Kupp, and Van Jefferson. Having 3 really good receivers in the NFL nowadays is such an advantage, because the talent gap between receivers and corners there's a substantial difference. Receiver is a lot more talented right now, and you saw that on display at the Combine. And so that's a huge advantage, especially in such a pass-heavy NFL. When you have that many options, it is tough for a defense to take care of everybody. And it opens things up for somebody like Smith and Watkins. And I didn't even mention in this whole equation your top-tier tight end in Dallas Goedert. It's not just an advantage in that way, just for all NFL teams, but for the Eagles, who had to become a run-heavy team last year to make the playoffs. They want to get back to being a pass-heavy offense, and they want to still see if Jalen Hurts can be that guy in a high-volume passing offense. They want him to take that step in 2022, barring they don't make another move at quarterback. And so how do you do that? Well, if you give them Allen Robinson or Christian Kirk or Amari Cooper with Quez Watkins, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert in 11 personnel, there's going to be no excuses at that point. It's either sink or swim. So there are a lot of advantages to spending that kind of money on a top tier pass catcher. And I would love Allen Robinson. To me, would be the dream. He can play both inside and out with Quez Watkins and him rotating. I mean, Devontae Smith can play inside and out as well. They can play the X, Y, and Z spots, more so Smith and Robinson than Watkins. And I know some people are talking about Robinson. He's, on the downward track of his career because of his numbers in 2021. But if you look at his production the years before in Chicago with bad quarterback play with Nick Foles and Mitchell Trubisky, this to me is still a top tier wide receiver in his prime. And last year, the lack of targets had everything to do with that offense with Matt Nagy, the offensive line, with Justin Fields growing, more that had to do compared to Robinson, regressing in any way. I don't think so. And man, I would love Allen Robinson. I would still be comfortable paying Christian Kirk, but it is something you got to go back and forth with because it isn't really a massive necessity. And with the way the Eagles do things philosophically in free agency, I think they would more likely target a tier 2 wide receiver that we'll get into coming up next. There's a couple guys that I want to get into that are more realistic for the Eagles, and I do think would fit in nicely with Smith and Watkins. So again, before we wrap up this segment, I do think that I would love to have a star like Allen Robinson come in. I would personally be all for that. At the same time, though, if it's either that or sign another big name free agent, let's say on defense, like a Marcus Williams at safety, or a Hassan Riddick, the edge rusher from the Carolina Panthers, the Temple kid who's had double-digit sacks in back-to-back years now, I'd be in for this move at receiver, but I would prefer, if I'm going to sign one big contract, if the Eagles are willing to splurge on one, I prefer defense. And then maybe go for a tier 2 receiver that we'll get into coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. And although football might be over, the regular season and the playoffs, you have the offseason, you can make your props when it comes to free agency, where these receivers are going to land, when it comes to the draft. The NFL Combine just passed by. You could have bet on that. Where is Russell Wilson going to land? Amari Cooper. You can get all of that and more at BetOnline. But not just that, you have the NBA and college basketball in full swing. You have hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage that was going on. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports betting, the scores, podcasts, and news this season. From the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired head coach is going to land, they're your number one spot for all your sports betting needs. Make sure you head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Monday edition of Locked On Eagles. Don't worry, Eagles fans, we will return with Mock Draft Monday next week. So that is going to return, but because NFL free agency starts next Tuesday is when the big moves come, and Wednesday is the official start of the free agent period, we will dive into this week free agent options at the positions that the Eagles are going to target. And today we're discussing wide receiver and the idea of, targeting a big name wide receiver like Allen Robinson, Christian Kirk, Amari Cooper. Is it worth it for the Eagles considering what they expect from Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins next year? I like the idea of it. I think they have the flexibility to go for one of those guys this year if they would want to come to Philly. But at the same time, if they're going to give out one big contract, I would prefer it to be on defense at safety, corner, edge rusher, linebacker, because I do like the options at receiver when it comes to tier 2 free agents, tier 3, and the NFL draft, where you do have those 4 picks on day 1 and the second round. So right now in segment 2, this is more of the realistic discussion. Again, would I be surprised if they would sign Allen Robinson? No. I thought it was unrealistic in 2017 for them to go after Alshon Jeffrey. I thought it was more going to be, Deshaun Jackson. Kenny Britt was a very popular name at the time. They traded for Torrey Smith. I'm like, okay, it'll be Torrey Smith, Jordan Matthews, maybe you draft somebody as well, but they brought in Alshon. So I'm not going to say it's impossible, and the Eagles definitely have a need for another proven wide receiver. But I think something more realistic would be along the lines of these players I'm going to discuss in segment 2. These tier 2 free agent options, and there's 2 names specifically that I want to get into. It's Pittsburgh Steelers slot receiver JuJu Smith-Schuster, and it's former Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver DJ Chark. Again, if the Eagles want to focus more on spending big, and plentiful on defense, maybe signing both a safety and a linebacker, these are options that make more sense. And just again, philosophically, the Eagles sign these kind of free agents, even the best free agent classes they've ever had, or signings they've made. Malcolm Jenkins comes to mind in recent years, Brandon Brooks, Rodney McLeod. Those were all seen as tier 2 free agent options. And I'm looking at JuJu and DJ Chark, and I think it makes a lot of sense. When it comes to JuJu first, starting off, the Eagles had interest in Smith-Schuster last year, regardless of Adam Schefter's rephrasing of that initial report that the Eagles were a dark horse for Smith-Schuster before he chose Pittsburgh over Kansas City, but the Eagles were in on it as well. Schefter rephrased it and said that Smith-Schuster's agent was more interested in Philadelphia as a potential option for his client. Again, I don't really believe that. I feel like Howie Roseman, after it didn't work out, told him to retract that. But regardless of the fact, the Eagles were interested in JuJu last year. And so I think they'll be interested in him again. It would make sense. He would be a good complement to what Watkins and Smith do. Quez Watkins played a lot of slot last year, and they might prefer to have him inside again this year. But he also can play Z wide receiver. A lot of the time last year, because they needed to get Jalen Reagor easy looks, which he still didn't capitalize on, Quez Watkins was playing at the Z with Devontae Smith at the X. So a lineup of Devontae at the X, Quez at the Z, and Smith-Schuster at the Y inside does make sense. He's a possession receiver that, he's like a better version of Jordan Matthews. He's not going to wow you with run after the catch ability or blazing speed, and he's not going to be your X receiver winning against press man coverage all the time. But he is a strong, reliable, dependable, safe target for Jalen Hurts that is proven to be productive. He's tough. He makes really tough catches over the middle of the field. And although his run after the catch ability isn't great, he's really hard to bring down. Again, he does have a strength to him over the middle that the Eagles could use, considering last year their passing attack over the middle of the field was non-existent. A lot of that comes with Jalen Hurts' development, and it was more on Hurts than the other receivers because there were looks to be had over the middle. But if you have another reliable target like Smith-Schuster and Goddard over the middle, it's going to encourage Jalen to utilize that area of the field. So it would make sense for Smith-Schuster, scheme fit, proven ability, style. I think it would make sense, and it wouldn't cost you a ton. He might want to sign a prove-it deal, and that could be in Philadelphia. And then when it comes to somebody like DJ Chark, this makes sense too. This is a very popular pairing for many. Gino in his offseason simulation series had Chark signing with the Eagles on a 1-year prove-it deal in 2022. He's that big body everybody wants, right? Some teams like to just mix and match and have interchangeable receivers that all are very similar stylistically, and others like to build that basketball team. They like to have the burner and Quez Watkins, the do-it-all small forward and Devontae Smith, and then the big-bodied center power forward and maybe a DJ Chark. And so if the Eagles want that kind of receiver, they might prefer Chark over somebody like Smith-Schuster. And Chark isn't just a big plotting receiver. I mean, he's faster than guys like Mike Williams, who were also, or Alshon Jeffrey back in 2017. This is a kid that coming out of LSU, I call him a kid, even though he's my age or probably older, but this is somebody coming out of LSU that ran under a 4.4. Like, he does have speed. He's young, and you could get him for maybe cheap considering the 2021 injury ravaged season. But 2020 DJ Chark, I had him on my fantasy team. He helped me win a championship. DJ Chark for a couple of years there was Jacksonville's most dependable player. And I think he would fit in with the Eagles as well, similar stylistically to what they want in their next addition at that position. I do think, though, when it comes to these two players and this tier of free agent receivers, you could make the argument that, one, they might not choose Philadelphia because if Smith-Schuster and Chark signed, odds are they're not signing a 3 to 4 year contract, right? They're going to sign a 1 year prove it deal, bank on themselves, increase the value because right now they're both at their lowest value they've been at in their careers. So they're probably going to want to sign 1 year deals and then cash in next year. Do they see the Eagles with Jalen Hurts? And again, last year, a run heavy team that already has 3 established targets in the passing game. Do they see Philadelphia as an ideal spot for a prove it like deal? I'm not sure. You might have a tougher time signing these kind of players. They might be better off gunning for a receiver in the NFL draft. Just also, too, not just based on that, but the talent in the first round, I think, is better than a Smith-Schuster Chark. But at the same time, there's a lot of receivers available this year. So they're not all going to be able to sign with the Bills or the Chiefs. And if Philadelphia is willing to pay, one of these guys is going to come. It's a big market and, they're a playoff team. So it's not like Philadelphia has nothing to offer. But I think it would be interesting to keep a close eye on these players. I think it would be more realistic. I would like both Smith-Schuster and Chark in this offense. I would just prefer if we're not going to hit on tier 1, I would maybe prefer to, again, if they want to sign a 1 year deal, I'm all in. But I would maybe lean towards taking somebody in the first 2 rounds and then signing a tier 3 receiver. That would just be where I'm at with this, but I think it's very likely the Eagles sign one of these 2 players. We'll get into tier 3 receivers coming up next, though. I think another strategy for the Birds, because I don't think that they're concerned, or I don't think they're going to be like some fans that say you can't draft a receiver early because you've already done it 3 times in the last 3 drafts. I think those are sunk costs, or at least 2 of the 3, and they would be willing to draft somebody. So they might want to go for a tier 3 receiver that's more insurance for a guy that you also draft, and you bring in 2 guys instead of signing a tier 1 or tier 2 free agent. It could be an option that I'll get into coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Built Bar. It is the time of year that most of the time I would have given up on my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. We're going to eat right in 2022, and it's all thanks to Built Bar. And it doesn't even feel like it's a chore or a resolution you have to do, or it doesn't even feel like you're eating healthy, because these Built Bars, they taste just like candy bars. They are covered in 100% chocolate. They're soft and easy to chew. It's all of the flavor and none of the guilt. Most Built Bars contain only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And they have so many delicious flavors: mint brownie, coconut almond. My favorite this month, white chocolate, cookies, and cream. They also have their puff bars now as well, the first ever protein-infused marshmallow bars. They have cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. Guys, check out Built.com for so many amazing flavors of Built bars and puff bars, and I can get you 15% off right now when you use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off your next order of Built bars at Built.com. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Monday edition of your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, Locked On Eagles. I'm Louis DiBiase riding solo. Gino will be back tomorrow. We continue free agent options tomorrow with running back and tight end. Today, we're getting into wide receiver. Are the Eagles going to gun for a big name like Amari Cooper, Allen Robinson, Christian Kirk? Will they target more of a team-friendly 1 year deal of JuJu Smith-Schuster or DJ Chark, and then maybe try to, if they do pan out really well in 2022 and they take that next step with Jalen Hurts, maybe they look to do their very traditional in-season contract extension like they did with Alshon Jeffrey back in 2017, because Alshon only signed that short-term deal. So it could be a similar strategy there. I think that's the most realistic, but at the same time, they might struggle to sign a prove-it player. And even if they don't struggle, you could argue the talent in the draft in the first 2 rounds are going to be better than somebody like Smith-Schuster and Chark. And guess what? With one of those players, you've got them on at least a 4-year contract, an inexpensive one, and they can grow. They're the same age pretty much as Smith and Watkins, and you more continue to develop the young receivers, and you continue with that strategy. And then maybe in that strategy, you bring in a rookie and you sign maybe not a Smith-Schuster or a DJ Chark, but a tier 3 free agent wide receiver that I think could make sense as insurance, depending on, again, the you don't know what happens in the draft. Free agency is before the draft. So you got to make sure you at least, cover yourself and make sure you have at least one other option this offseason at receiver, because you don't want to need Jalen Reagor again in 2022. So maybe that would lead to the signing of, let's say, a Zach Pascal from the Indianapolis Colts, who Nick Sirianni knows very well. He coached Pascal with the Colts. He helped develop him into a serviceable role player when Paris Campbell really wasn't stepping up. And when there was injuries to Michael Pittman, Pascal was, for the majority of the beginning of the season last year, was probably Carson Wentz's most productive pass catcher, or at least at wide receiver. You could see Pascal as that third guy or somebody that can compete with a rookie. And if you still have some hope for Jalen Reagor and you don't want to instantly replace him, Pascal would make sense there, because then again, if Reagor were to emerge next year, or you did land a first or second round receiver, like let's say you landed Christian Watson in the second round, eventually Pascal would be a very fine wide receiver 4. I think this could make a whole lot of sense. And then you draft somebody early with all the draft picks you have. And again, the prospect pool at receiver right now looks awesome. And there's going to be options in the first 2 rounds. Another name to look out for in this tier that I've covered personally with the Buffalo Bills that I really like that no one's mentioning, because there's probably 15 to 20 names that people are talking about before him, but it's Buffalo Bills wide receiver, and it's not Emmanuel Sanders or Cole Beasley. It's Isaiah McKenzie. Isaiah McKenzie would be really interesting for the Eagles for a number of reasons. Number one, I actually thought last year when Cole Beasley was hurt, McKenzie, especially that game against the Patriots where he took over and gashed New England's defense, I thought he was almost better than Beasley in the slot. He is extremely explosive. He's versatile as well. The Bills at the end of the year were using him at running back, kind of like the 49ers were doing with Deebo Samuel. And McKenzie was very serviceable in that role. He's explosive. He's smaller, of course. So, he's a gadget player kind of. But in the slot at running back, he was really good last year. And I do think as well, the Eagles desperately need return help. So it'd be a nice bonus to bring in a receiver that also does have return ability. It's ridiculous they need help at returner, considering the speed of guys like Watkins and Reagor and, Gainwell. But nonetheless, here we are. Isaiah McKenzie could offer that kind of option, and he really wouldn't cost a whole lot. So Isaiah McKenzie, Zach Pascal, one of those players, and then maybe you draft one early. This could be the option that people might like if they would prefer to get one of those prospects in the draft over Christian Kirk or DJ Chark or JuJu Smith-Schuster, or if they struggle to bring in one of those names. It's not just Pascal and McKenzie, though. Keep an eye out for, somebody like Emmanuel Sanders might make sense in the slot. Sammy Watkins is on the open market as well. AJ Green, who I thought was shot last year, but was a lot better in Arizona than I had imagined. There is some names here as well to keep an eye on if the Eagles want to do that, 2-1 strategy instead. But no matter what happens here, I do think the Eagles are going to add at least one, definitely probably more wide receivers this offseason to go with Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins. It's not a dire need like it's been in most off seasons over the past few years, really the past, 3 or 4 years. But at the same time, it is something they still have work to do. And I like their options. I think we're going to be pretty happy with the Eagles receiving core heading into May and the summer as we look towards training camp. So those are some options. Let me know what you think. What would you want the Eagles wide receiver strategy to be this offseason, starting next week with free agency? Hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnBirds, at DBLCLOE. Make sure as well you subscribe to the podcast. We're available Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and audio, video on YouTube. Subscribe to Locked On Eagles on our YouTube channel. And again, follow us on Twitter. We'll be back tomorrow. Free agent options continues with running back and tight end. Gino will be back as well. That's coming up tomorrow. We thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Now, make sure your second listen of the day is the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring you the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Louis DiBiase signing off. We'll see you tomorrow on your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, Locked On Eagles. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for listening and watching. And let's go Birds.